Hello and welcome to my workshop. So today we're going to work on a 1/8 scale drag car. It's going to be a Dodge Coronet, and we're going to take this little 1/25th scale model to help us get the details just right. It's going to be a lot bigger build than what I'm usually doing, but I think it should turn out pretty good. So let's get started. So typical, the first thing you would want to do one of these builds is to get some good drawings and scale these things up to the proper size, and then make any other drawings that you may be missing that you can't find online. So I'm taking these drawings and making the inner structure that the outer form pieces will be glued onto it later on. So you want to try to get the inner structure far enough in that it's not intersecting and you have enough room for the outer skin, as some of them taper in front and back. I usually go close to where the inner door panel would be. It seems to be a pretty good spot to make these inner structures fall. So these temporary braces are just to keep the pieces square and in alignment. Later on, they'll just be cut out with some some side cutters, and then sanded back down. So normally I would cut the profile for like the wheel wells and the taper front to back for the body before I glue this together. I just forgot, so a little bit extra effort to get this thing laid out while it's put together, but it wasn't too bad. So these 1, 2, 3 blocks really come in handy, and as weights to try to hold this paper down as I'm making the template around there. And then just take a bandsaw to cut the majority of the material off before you start sanding. So when you're sanding these bodies down, you use a different number of Dremel tools and sandpaper and scrapers and knives, which kind of whatever you can find to get the profile correct. You're basically trying to carve this in and remove the material in a way that mimics the original body as much as possible. So here I'm putting the taper in the very back of the body, so it doesn't just go straight back. It tapers right around where the wheel wells are. Again, just using whatever you can to get the material removed, and here using this sander with a little vacuum attached, trying to get the bulk of the material. Then you can come back in with hand sanders and kind of maybe Dremel tools and get the shape refined. Again, one thing to make sure that you're, if you're messing with this MDF, is to really use good respiration and ventilation or filtration, whatever you have, depending on where your setup is. I have ventilation and filtration, and I use a mask. It's just really not good stuff to breathe, so you want to avoid it as much as possible. So the hump right around where the wheel well, I just didn't get that pronounced enough with sanding. So I came back with some body filler. This is just like a Bondo you'd get at the automotive supply store, and kind of fill that in the best as I could, and come back in and then sanded that back down, and it gives it a nice hump that that this original body has right around the wheel well. So cutting these little, I guess, fake vents in was pretty challenging to get that just accurate, because they had to be square and tapered, and really took a lot of different tools, sandpaper, scraping to get them down. But I think in the end I finally was able to get those pretty close. Again here, just taking a file and doing some final shaping by kind of scraping that material off. So here I'm just trying to get the inner profile cut and get some of that material removed from the backside. So the taper on the body tapered further in than the material I had available. So just added some styrene on to bulk it out and then sand that back down to the proper shape. So one of the most difficult things to do isn't just making the panel, but it's making an exact copy of that panel mirrored. And so it's just a lot of back and forth, careful measuring and comparing one to the next. You make a few steps on one panel, you work on the other one, and you kind of work your way through. So this is a relief cut in the front where the door is, just to give a nice nice area that would allow you to cut that material back, real defined, and make it easier on later on when you're trying to get this thing out of the mold and get it cut down. So just like adding on the styrene in the back, I'm just adding on some quarter round here to simulate the fender flares that come out, and then they'll give a nice look once it's molded in. So both of these side panels are complete now and ready to be vacuum molded. And as you can see, you take basic MDF shape, carve that in. Where I wanted to add a little piece at the bottom, I just glued on a little bit of styrene. Went with some quarter round styrene on the edge just to give that a little lip where the I guess it's more like a fender detail or trim piece would go. Right here in the center, after I got this ground down, I knew it was a hump here and a little bit higher point right around this fender than it was front to back. But I thought I was able to carve that down enough, and I just wasn't happy with that. So what I ended up doing was just taking some Bondo and place this roughly in the shape I wanted, and come back and sanded that in, ready to be vacuum formed. The edges that are thin, like right here on the end, or like right here on the top, and as like this little bit of a lip where the front door would go, where I'm gonna essentially try to cut it off at that edge. What I've done is I've taken some thin CA glue and just dripped it onto this MDF, and it's almost like a sponge. It just soaks up that CA glue, and it really hardens that MDF down, and it'll make this mold last a lot longer. essentially I'm ready to move forward now and do a vacuum pull, so hopefully I can get that done successfully all in one piece, and then we'll be going on to, I guess, probably the trunk next. Alright, so let's get to that. So here is just adding in pieces that will go between the inner structure and the molded outer body panels, and just so you have a nice solid base material to connect those two. So to put these styrene pieces together, I use a solvent, which I use a clear PVC cleaner as the solvent, and it takes a good 30-45 minutes or so, depending on the thickness, to fully harden back up and not be soft. So I'll come in and usually take some super glue on the backside, and just to kind of hold it in place. And it does add some backing and some strength, the super glue does, but the real hold comes from the solvent. This is a new tool that I really like, a little curve, and it really helped me out getting this windshield set up. This is a pretty difficult thing to get, as a when the curve goes in to the material. Luckily the front of that's rounded, but it's still really difficult to get that just right. And so not only goes tapered in from front to back, but it goes taper from side to side, so that the little bit higher in the middle than on the side. So just a little light pressure slowly, and eventually you'll get that thing down to pretty close, and then come in with some sandpaper and do the final details. Alright, so I have the panels glued on the side here, and starting to really start to take shape. You see how the inner structure sits, and these temporary pieces here will eventually come out once I get enough structure in here to keep this square. I've also made the rear trunk. Now this is technically a little bit more than the trunk. The trunk will go right about in that general vicinity, and this will be just like the edge of the I guess the rear fender part. But anyway, it's I made it as one piece, and then what I'll do is I'll come back with a scribe tool and cut a line in to represent where the trunk will open. And so just MDF, build it up with styrene where I need it here and there, shaping these pieces, get everything sanded. It's kind of, I got a contour, a little bit of a lip right here where it meets up to the rear glass. But anyways, ready to do a vacuum pull on this, and then we'll get this piece glued into the back and just kind of keep working our way forward. So when you get these pieces out of the mold, the first thing I do after I do a rough cut is I come on the inside or wherever I need to have the cut lines, and then mark those down, just so I'm really clear and I'm not making any mistakes cutting that out. But just to kind of add a little bit of extra support when I'm gluing this piece in, I took some thicker, maybe 80,000 styrene strips, and I glued those along the underside, and that gives a little bit of support for the trunk to be glued down, and until I can get everything secure. So I needed a firewall that would look pretty good when the front of this car is lifted up. So I'm just making a little box that protrudes off, and I'll end up adding details, cutouts, and whatever to make this thing look more realistic, like the real one. So it looks a little bit odd because it's so much narrower than the body, but what you got to think about is that the way this is set up is the fenders and all the inner structure for the fenders have been removed to make that front clip. So that's why it's so much narrower than the front end. And so like I said, just come back and cutting out details, adding in some pieces, trying to make this thing as realistic looking as possible. Alright, so making really good progress on the Coronet. I have vacuum formed the trunk, glued this in, did a little start of filling in here, just a little bit of more of a gap here than what I wanted, so I just put in a little bit of like a styrene rod just to kind of fill in the hole. I'll come back with a super glue just to get the bulk of it. Did a couple rounds of sanding, and then a little bit of the Tamiya putty on top. Still have quite a bit more to do, but I think the transition is looking pretty good. Still got to get the taillights, but I've started to work on the firewall. As mentioned, this is going to be a flip forward front end, so it's the style where I think a lot of times they're like a one piece hood and fender and grill and everything, and so it'll flip forward. And so with doing that, you'll see that you'll have to have a firewall in there to be able to have something to look at that's of interest. So I've got to start on this. This is the basic structure, and I started adding a couple details here and there, just random things like some kind of light. I got to make a cutout here, and like a lot more random details to add. But the general overall shape is pretty close to that, what I need. I'll have to come back in and put a cowl here basically for the lower part of the windshield, and that'll just kind of cover up and transition right into here. That's kind of where the way their original one is. It's more square, and then this is rounded off to where the hood would come down. So like I said, making good progress. I got to keep on going with that. All right, so the next two big steps are the roof, and I probably will make that as one piece, and this cowl section. So we'll just kind of see which one makes the most sense to make next, and we'll just keep working on this. So now just making the lower window, I guess it's the cowl, the piece that will go in between the hood and the front window. And again, this is another difficult one because it's, you know, tapered and it's got a dished out area in the middle. But eventually, you know, just kind of work at this and you get that piece to look correct. So once I have the shape, what I come back with is some quarter round. I did the same thing in the rear, and this will basically form the lower part of where the windshield goes down. The same I did in the trunk area where the back window would go. You know, again, add a little bit of structure underneath just to kind of hold it in place and give a little bit extra strength, and then just kind of lay that piece in and solvent glue it in, get it in shape, and you're good to go. Okay, so I'm making really good progress. A lot of good stuff going on. I got the sides complete, the trunk's complete. The firewall still needs a fair amount of work. I was able to get this front cowls section done. This will be the lower part of the windshield. So I still have the whole front end to make, but I'll do that in the next video along with making the roof and any other little final details I need to get for this. A lot of other stuff coming up, a lot of fun projects. Looking forward to getting to that. Until then, we'll see you in the rocks.